On my 17th birthday, I quietly transferred my $5 million inheritance from my grandparents into a highly secured trust. Thank God I did. Because the very next morning, my parents slid a medical evaluation across the breakfast table, claiming a doctor thought I was mentally unstable. They said they would be managing my finances from that moment on. They thought I was just a naive teenager they could easily break. They had no idea my defensive move planted a ticking time bomb. 15 years later, they tried to trigger that bomb again, and it blew their entire lives to pieces. My name is Cassidy, 32 years old, and my family has always seen me as a personal piggy bank wrapped in a straitjacket. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart toxic relatives who mistook your silence for weakness. Crystal glasses clinked inside the dining room of the Oak Ridge Country Club. We were gathered to celebrate my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, but I knew the truth. Thomas and Barbara never hosted a dinner without an ulterior motive. I sat at the far end of the table waiting for the inevitable shoe to drop. It did not take long. Terrence, my brother-in-law, leaned across the table. The sharp African-American broker flashed an arrogant smile. As an ambitious real estate broker, he loved spending my sister's money to project the image of a self-made millionaire. "So, Cassidy," Terrence said, his voice carrying over the soft background jazz, "I am closing a massive deal on a new luxury development downtown. It is a guaranteed return. I need you to unlock your trust fund and invest $2 million. Consider it a family favor." I looked up from my plate, keeping my expression neutral. I am not interested in real estate investments, and my trust fund is locked for a reason. My older sister Penelope let out a sharp, condescending laugh. She took a sip of her expensive champagne and rolled her eyes. "Come on, Cassidy. You are 32, single, and pushing papers for a living. Mom and Dad spent thousands covering up your episodes when you were 17. You were completely out of control. The least you can do is help Terrence expand his business. He is actually doing something with his life." The casual mention of my supposed episodes made my grip tighten on my napkin. For 15 years, they had spun a narrative that I was unhinged, using a paid-off doctor to brand me as unstable when my grandparents left me that money. They used it to control me, threaten me, and to justify their demands. But I was not that scared 17-year-old girl anymore. I worked as a forensic accountant for a federal contractor, tracking down financial fraud for a living. I spent my days destroying criminals smarter and far more dangerous than Terrence. I knew exactly how to read a balance sheet, and I knew how desperate my brother-in-law really was. "My paper pushing pays my bills just fine," I said evenly, "and I am not giving you a single dime, Terrence. Your last 3 developments went bankrupt, and you are currently leveraging Mom and Dad's beach house to keep your brokerage afloat. I am not throwing my inheritance into your sinking ship." Terrence's face flushed with sudden anger. His charming facade cracked instantly, revealing the desperate man underneath. He slammed his hand flat against the table. "You do not know what you are talking about," he snapped. "I am offering you a ground floor opportunity, and you are acting like a lunatic. Mom was right about you. You really do live in an alternate reality." Barbara chimed in from the head, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Cassidy, please do not start one of your scenes. Terrence is offering you a way to finally contribute to this family. You have hoarded that money for over a decade while your sister builds a real legacy. It is time you act like a responsible adult and let the men handle the heavy lifting." I signaled the waiter and politely asked for my portion of the bill. When the black leather folder arrived, my mother let out a dramatic, exasperated sigh. "Do not be ridiculous, Cassidy," Barbara scolded, waving her hand. "We are paying for the anniversary dinner. Put the card away before you embarrass us in front of the club members." Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out a solid metal black card, and handed it to the waiter. "Charge my meal and my drinks to this," I told him calmly. "And please add a 20% tip for the entire table." The waiter nodded and hurried away. Penelope nearly choked on her champagne. I stood up and smoothed the front of my tailored dress. "Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad," I said, my tone completely devoid of warmth. "I think I have had enough family bonding for one evening. Enjoy the rest of your dinner." I turned to leave, ready to walk out the double doors and leave their toxic dynamic behind. But before I could take a single step away, my father reached into his leather briefcase. He slammed a thick manila legal folder onto the center of the dining table. The heavy smack of paper against wood echoed sharply through the quiet dining room, turning the heads of nearby patrons. "Sit down," Thomas ordered. His voice dropped, the jovial act entirely shifting into a dangerous low register that commanded immediate obedience. I paused, looking back at the thick stack of legal documents resting between the crystal wine glasses. "I was not asking you for a favor, Cassidy," my father said, tapping the manila folder. A cold smile spread across his face. "I filed for an emergency conservatorship this morning. Your accounts are already frozen." Years of analyzing complex financial fraud taught me panic was a luxury I could not afford. I stared at the manila folder, then walked out of the dining room. The valet quickly brought my car around, and I got into my sedan. My mind raced through the legal ramifications of an emergency conservatorship. They were moving very fast, but I had prepared for this exact scenario for 15 years. As I slid the key into the ignition, flashing lights illuminated the parking lot. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt behind my car, blocking me in. 4 officers stepped out, hands resting near their belts. I rolled down my window, keeping my hands visible. Before the nearest officer spoke, a black Mercedes pulled up next to the cruisers. The passenger door flew open and my mother stumbled out. Barbara was putting on a masterclass in theatrical distress. She sobbed into a lace handkerchief, clinging to the arm of a tall, silver-haired man. "Officer, please be careful," my mother cried out, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of the valet staff and lingering club members. "She is having a severe manic episode. She just attacked her father inside the restaurant. She is completely untethered from reality." I recognized the man immediately. It was Dr. Aris. He was the corrupt psychiatrist my parents paid off when I was 17 to diagnose me with a fictitious mood disorder. That fake diagnosis was the weapon they used to strip my autonomy back then. Seeing him meant my father was executing a coordinated strike. The emergency conservatorship filing required an immediate medical hold to legitimize their claim. Dr. Aris presented a laminated badge to the lead officer. "I am Dr. Aris, the family psychiatrist. We are authorizing an involuntary psychiatric hold under Section 5150. The patient has a documented history of severe paranoia and financial delusion. She attempted to unlawfully access a multi-million-dollar family trust. She requires immediate transport to a secure facility." The lead officer approached my window, his expression stern. "Miss, I need you to step out of the vehicle and keep your hands visible. We are transporting you to the hospital for a mandatory psychiatric evaluation." My mother wailed louder, collapsing against Dr. Aris. "Just go with them, Cassidy. We only want to help you. You are sick, sweetheart." If I were the scared teenager they remembered, I would have screamed. I would have fought. The officers cried out that I was being framed and given them the exact manic reaction they needed to justify the involuntary hold. Instead, I calmly turned off the ignition, removed my keys, and stepped out of the vehicle. I stood tall, my posture perfectly relaxed. "Officer," I said, my voice completely steady, "I understand you are responding to a medical request. However, you are being manipulated by individuals who are currently attempting to commit conservatorship fraud. I am not having a manic episode, I have not assaulted anyone, and I am certainly not a danger to myself or others." Dr. Aris scoffed, shaking his head at the police. "This is classic paranoid projection, officer. She believes her family is conspiring against her. It is a textbook symptom of her condition. Please, we must transport her before she attempts to harm herself." "Before you touch me," I told the officer, holding his gaze, "I advise you to look at the document in my glove compartment. As a forensic financial auditor holding a high-level security clearance, I undergo rigorous psychological evaluations every 6 months. My most recent clearance was finalized last Tuesday." The officer frowned, glancing at Dr. Aris, whose confident expression faltered. "May I reach into my glove compartment?" I asked. The officer nodded slowly. I reached inside and pulled out a sealed envelope bearing the seal of the United States Office of Personnel Management. He broke the seal and unfolded the thick stationery. That is a certified psychiatric evaluation signed by a federal medical examiner. I explained, watching my mother's fake sobbing stop. It states I possess 0 markers for any psychological disorder, paranoia, or cognitive impairment. It also states I am 100% capable of managing my own financial affairs. Furthermore, Dr. Aris lost his hospital admitting privileges 3 years ago due to ethical violations, a fact you can verify with a quick search on your terminal. The lead officer read through the federal document, noting the official watermarks and the signature of the federal examiner. He handed the paper to his partner, then turned his gaze toward Dr. Aris and my mother. The atmosphere in the parking lot shifted instantly. The police officers dropped their defensive postures and glared at my parents. "Doctor," the officer said, his tone turning frosty, "this is a federally certified document dated 5 days ago. Are you deliberately filing a false medical directive to misuse resources?" Dr. Aris took a step backward, his face draining of color. "I was relying on the parents' current testimony regarding her behavior this evening. Testimony that is entirely fabricated," I stated. I paid for my meal and walked out quietly. There was no assault. My mother stood frozen, the lace handkerchief crushed in her fist. The performance was over. The police instructed me that I was free to go and sharply ordered Dr. Aris and my mother to remain at the scene to answer questions regarding filing a false report. I unlocked my car door, feeling a surge of quiet triumph. I had neutralized their weapon. I slid into the driver's seat and reached for the door handle. Suddenly, a large hand clamped down on my car door, preventing me from pulling it shut. Terrence leaned his head into my open window. The smell of expensive cologne and scotch washed over me. He looked pleased with himself. "Cute trick," Terrence sneered. "But while you were dealing with the cops, I legally accessed your condo using Penelope's spare key. We are changing the front locks." I slammed my very heavy car door shut, locking Terrence on the outside. I tore out of the country club parking lot. My mind shifted gears. Terrence was arrogant but also desperate. His failing brokerage needed liquid assets fast. My parents had filed the conservatorship paperwork this morning, giving him a false sense of invincibility. He actually believed a pending court petition gave him the authority to seize my property. I lived in a high-security building in the financial district. When I pulled into the underground garage, my pulse quickened. A commercial moving truck blocked the loading bay. 2 men were loading my custom velvet armchair. I bypassed the elevator and took the stairs 2 at a time to the penthouse level. The heavy double doors to my unit were propped wide open. Inside, total chaos reigned. 4 men were wrapping my artwork in bubble wrap. And standing in the center of my living room, sipping a bottle of my expensive sparkling water, was Terrence. He wore a smug grin, checking his gold Rolex. "You made good time," he said, gesturing around the room. "But you are too late. The locks are swapped. Penelope had a spare key from that time she supposedly watered your plants 3 years ago. We figured we would save you the trouble of packing before you get shipped off to a facility." "Get out of my home," I said, my voice dangerously low. Terrence let out a mocking laugh. "Your home, not anymore. As a licensed real estate broker, I have already fast-tracked a cash sale for this unit. I have a buyer flying in from Dubai tomorrow morning. Since Thomas and Barbara are your newly appointed legal conservators, they authorized me to liquidate this abandoned property. Your parents are taking control of your estate to protect you from yourself." He took a sip of water, looking down at me. "This is what happens when you refuse to help family. You could have unlocked your trust fund at dinner. I needed that $2 million to save my development project. Penelope told me how you acted when you were 17, throwing a tantrum and moving your inheritance away from your father. The adults are back in charge now. I am getting my commission on this sale, and your trust fund will cover the rest of my business expenses once the judge signs the final order." I did not scream, nor did I demand he drop my things. I calmly reached into my tote bag and pulled out my tablet. I tapped the screen twice, accessing the municipal property database, and held the glowing screen up to his face. "Terrence, what does the deed say?" I asked. He squinted at the screen, his smug expression faltering. Owner of record, Sentinel Asset Management LLC. So what you hid your property behind a shell company. The conservatorship gives your parents control of your businesses, too. You should have read the corporate charter before you hired movers, I said, swiping to the next document. Sentinel Asset Management is not a pass-through LLC. It is a highly protected corporate entity with a board of directors. I am merely an employee granted residence as a corporate benefit. I do not own this condo. The corporation does. Terrence froze. The cold water bottle slipped slightly in his grip. And since the corporation owns this condo, I continued, stepping into his personal space. My parents' pending conservatorship petition has zero legal jurisdiction here. They cannot authorize you to sell a property I do not own. I watched the color drain from his face as reality set in. Do you know what you just did, Terrence? I asked, keeping my tone conversational. You used a stolen key to enter a corporate-owned property. You hired men to remove corporate assets. You attempted to broker a fraudulent real estate transaction for a property you have no legal right to sell. That is breaking and entering grand larceny and felony wire fraud. Your broker license is effectively dead as of this exact moment. You are lying, Terrence stammered, looking around the room. Penelope said you bought this place with your trust money. Penelope is an idiot and you are a criminal, I replied. I tapped an application on my phone. I just signaled building security. They are federal contractors, Terrence, not rent-a-cops. They take corporate espionage very seriously. Right on cue, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. 3 massive security guards in tactical gear stepped into my living room. I pointed directly at Terrence. This man broke in and is attempting to steal corporate property, I told the lead guard. Please remove him and detain the moving crew until the police arrive. The guards moved with terrifying efficiency. 2 of them grabbed Terrence by the arms, nearly lifting him off his feet. He dropped the water bottle. It shattered on the hardwood floor. The movers immediately dropped their boxes and raised their hands in surrender. Get your hands off me, Terrence shouted, struggling against the guards as they hauled him backward toward the open doorway. I am a licensed broker. You cannot do this. I stood in my living room watching him thrash. Make sure he stays off the property, I instructed the security team. As they dragged Terrence into the hallway and shoved him toward the waiting elevator, his panic twisted into pure, venomous rage. The elevator doors began to slide open, but he fought the guards, digging his heels into the carpet. You think you are so smart, Cassidy, Terrence yelled, his voice echoing down the corridor. You think you won because you hit a condo. You have no idea what your parents actually did. I stood in the doorway staring at him as the guards forced him into the elevator car. Check your credit score, Terrence screamed, his face red with manic desperation. Your parents already co-signed a $2 million business loan using your social security number. The elevator doors shut, silencing Terrence. I stood in the hallway of my penthouse, a $2 million loan. My pulse drummed a steady rhythm against my throat as I walked back into my living room. I bypassed the half-wrapped artwork, heading straight for my home office. I locked the door behind me, dropped into my desk chair, and booted up my encrypted laptop. I did not panic. Panic is a luxury for people who cannot read a balance sheet. I logged into my secure credit monitoring portal. Terrence was not bluffing. Under active credit lines sat a commercial loan for $2 million. It had been finalized exactly 4 days ago. The primary debtor was Vanguard Luxury Estates, Terrence's failing brokerage. The guarantor listed right below it was my name tied to my social security number. I pulled the origination documents from the public filing system to see how they bypassed verification protocols. As the PDF loaded, a sickening feeling washed over me. Attached to the loan application was a scanned copy of a medical power of attorney. It was the exact paper my parents had forced me to sign when I was 17, right before they brought in Dr. Eris to declare me mentally unfit. They had kept it. They harbored that document for a decade and a half to weaponize my identity. Penelope and my parents had resurrected a dead legal mechanism to forge my signature and bind me to Terrence's sinking ship. I dialed my mother. I knew she was likely still fuming from the failed ambush, but I needed her to confirm her involvement on a recorded line. She answered on the second ring, her voice dripping with arrogant satisfaction. "Well," Barbara said, "I assume you spoke with Terrence. Are you ready to stop this ridiculous tantrum and apologize to your father?" "You used a 15-year-old medical directive to commit wire fraud," I said, keeping my tone flat. "You forged my signature on a $2 million loan." My mother let out a dismissive sigh, annoyed by my lack of hysterics. "Stop using such dramatic words, Cassidy. Fraud is what criminals do. We are family. We leveraged an available asset to keep your brother-in-law's business afloat. You have been hoarding your grandfather's money for years while Penelope struggles to maintain her household." "You stole my identity," I stated. "We gave you life, Cassidy," Barbara snapped, her voice turning cold. "We fed you, we clothed you, and we tried to give you the world. Using your credit is just back pay for the absolute embarrassment you caused us. We had a spot secured for you at Cornell. All our friends knew you were going to an Ivy League school. And what did you do? You threw it in our faces. You humiliated your father and me by choosing a cheap state college just to spite us. You owe us this." She was breathing heavily into the receiver, completely consumed by her own narcissistic logic. She believed my refusal to be their trophy child justified a $2 million financial crime. "Your father and I are your legal conservators now," she continued, regaining her smug composure. "Or we will be officially by the end of the week. The judge will see that you are clearly paranoid and financially incompetent. The loan will just be absorbed into your estate management. So sit in your condo, pack your bags, and wait for our lawyers to contact you." I ended the call. I did not yell. I did not shed a single tear. Crying would not fix my credit score, and it certainly would not put my abusive family in federal prison. I turned my attention back to my monitors. My mother thought she had checkmated me. She thought tying my name to Vanguard Luxury Estates would force me to surrender my trust fund to save myself from sudden bankruptcy. She underestimated what a forensic accountant does when pushed into a corner. I opened a specialized tracking program I used for my federal contracting work. It was tracing software designed to follow digital breadcrumbs of laundered money across global banking networks. If Terrence had taken out a $2 million loan to save his real estate business, that money had to be sitting in a corporate escrow account, or it had been dispersed to pay off local creditors. I entered the routing and account numbers from the loan document. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing standard banking firewalls using my authorized federal credentials. I needed to see the exact trajectory of those stolen funds. The software began to run its trace, mapping the flow of the $2 million from the commercial lender into Vanguard Luxury Estates' primary business operating account. But the money did not stay there. According to the digital ledger, the funds sat in Terrence's business account for exactly 47 minutes. Then, the entire $2 million was fractured into dozens of smaller wire transfers. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes narrowing as I followed the branching pathways of the money. Terrence was not paying off angry contractors or settling local real estate debts. The software tracked the fractured payments as they bounced through a labyrinth of shell companies. They moved from Delaware to Wyoming to Nevada, being washed and layered to hide their exact origin. I initiated a forced consolidation protocol on my software, commanding the program to find the ultimate destination of the scattered funds. A progress bar flashed across my screen. The system processed the global routing numbers, tearing through the layers of digital obfuscation my brother-in-law had clumsily set up. The loading bar hit 100%. A final destination popped up on my screen in bright red text. The money had not gone to Terrence's real estate business at all. Every single cent of the $2 million had been wired to an anonymous offshore shell company located in the Cayman Islands. The Caymans. Terrence was laundering money, framing me for wire fraud using my social security number. I calculated my next move as my phone vibrated. The caller ID showed Penelope. I answered, keeping my voice emotionless. "Cassidy, do not hang up," Penelope pleaded, sobbing. "I had no idea what Terrence was planning. He forced me to give him your key. He is out of control and I am terrified." I leaned back, recognizing her manipulation. Penelope always used tears when her schemes backfired. He committed felonies using a forged document, I stated. You are an accessory to fraud. I know, she cried. He manipulated Mom and Dad. He threatened to leave me. I need to make things right. I have documents proving Terrence set this up. Please meet me at the Roasted Bean Cafe. It is public safe. I must give you this proof before he realizes it is missing. You are my only sister. A cafe meeting just hours after a failed psychiatric hold was a blatant setup. They needed me to have a public meltdown to justify their narrative. I will be there, I replied. I packed my tablet and drove to the financial district. The Roasted Bean was packed with the afternoon business crowd. The loud hum of espresso machines provided a chaotic backdrop for whatever trap my sister had set. I spotted Penelope sitting at a corner table near the pastry display. She wore oversized sunglasses. I sat across from her. Where are the documents? I asked. In my car, Penelope said, her eyes darting around. I wanted to make sure you showed up. Let me grab our coffees, then we can walk out. Black Americano, right? Sure, I said, pulling out my phone. Penelope walked toward the pickup counter where 2 drinks waited. I angled my phone screen using the dark glass reflection to watch her. Her back stiffened. Her hand hovered over the left cup. With a quick flick, she dropped a pill into the liquid and swirled it seamlessly. She was trying to drug me. A sedative would make me slur my words and appear unhinged in front of 50 witnesses. It was perfect evidence for the conservatorship hearing. Penelope returned carrying the cups. She set the left cup directly in front of me and kept the right one for herself. Drink up, Penelope urged, forcing a tight smile. You look exhausted, Cassidy. I need a napkin, I said, gesturing toward the condiment station behind her. Could you grab me one? In the span of a single second, I swapped the 2 identical coffee cups, sliding the spiked Americano to her side of the table and pulling her clean latte toward me. She turned back oblivious and handed me a napkin. Thanks, I said, lifting the warm latte to my lips. Penelope grabbed her cup and took a deep gulp. We sat in silence. I watched the second hand on my watch. It did not take long for the drug to hit her. Penelope blinked rapidly, shaking her head as if clearing a fog. Her posture slouched and her calculated expression dissolved into a grimace. Where are the documents now, Penelope? I asked again. Penelope giggled, a harsh sound, drawing a glance from the businessman at the next table. Documents. You are so stupid, Cassidy. There are no documents. Her words were thick and heavy, slurring together as the chemical stripped away her inhibitions. Then why am I here today? I asked calmly. Because you ruin everything. Penelope spat out, her voice rising uncontrollably. You always ruined everything. You were supposed to be the crazy one, but instead you got everything. You got the brains, you got the independence, and you got Grandpa's money. You think Mom and Dad wanted to lock you up just for fun. Grandpa gave you the $5 million because he knew Dad would waste it. He explicitly told Dad he was a financial failure right before he died. He bypassed his own son to give a 17-year-old girl the family fortune. She slammed her hand on the table, knocking over her half-empty cup. The dark liquid spilled across the wood, but she did not even notice. We needed that money to maintain our lifestyle, Penelope slurred loudly, leaning heavily across the table. You were just a kid. You were supposed to hand it over. When you locked it in that trust, you humiliated us. I hate you for that. I have always hated you. We are going to take everything from you today, and everyone is going to see exactly how crazy you are. The drug was completely overpowering her system now. Her eyes were unfocused, and she swayed violently in her chair. She realized her body was failing her. Confusion flashed across her face, quickly replaced by panic. She knew her plan had misfired. She was the one losing control in a crowded room. Penelope looked wildly around the cafe, her gaze landing on the large glass pastry display case right behind her chair. A desperate, malicious light sparked in her eyes. She decided to enact the final phase of their setup regardless of her physical state. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She pointed a finger at my face. Help! Penelope screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice shrill and echoing over the espresso machines. Help me! My sister is attacking me! Without waiting for a reaction, Penelope violently threw her entire body backward. She slammed into the glass display case with explosive force. The thick glass shattered instantly, raining jagged shards and crushed pastries across the cafe floor. Penelope collapsed into the wreckage, wailing and clutching her arm as patrons jumped out of their seats in shock. I stood up slowly, looking past my sister's thrashing form. Through the front entrance of the cafe, two uniformed police officers walked through the doors. Their hands immediately dropped to their radios as they took in the scene. The officers sprinted forward. Penelope wailed amidst shattered glass, pointing a blood-streaked finger at me. She sobbed that I pushed her, that I was having a psychotic break and needed to be locked away. The officers did not hesitate. One knelt beside my sister while the other roughly spun me around, pulling my arms back. Cold handcuffs clicked tight around my wrists. I did not resist. I knew how a struggle would look on the police report. They marched me out of the cafe, pushing me into a squad car while the crowd filmed the spectacle. I sat in the hard plastic seat, breathing evenly. Penelope had just escalated her own destruction. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and bleach. I sat alone at a metal table for an hour before the heavy door clicked open. My father walked in first, followed by my mother. They had abandoned their country club attire for somber clothing. Barbara clutched a thick leather binder to her chest. A tired detective trailed behind them, looking sympathetic to their manufactured grief. Thomas placed his hands flat on the table, leaning dangerously close to my face. His eyes held no warmth. "Look at what you have done," Thomas said, his voice a low rumble designed to project authority. "Your sister is in the emergency room getting stitches because of your episode. You could have killed her." "I never touched her," I replied simply. Barbara let out a sharp theatrical gasp. She turned to the detective, eyes brimming with fresh tears. "You see, she is completely detached from reality. She does not even remember the violent outburst." My mother slid the leather binder toward the detective. "These are her medical records. She was diagnosed with severe paranoid delusions and manic aggression when she was 17. We spent 15 years managing her condition privately, but clearly she stopped taking her medication." The detective opened the binder, scanning the fabricated documents my parents secured from Dr. Aris years ago. It was a masterpiece of medical forgery detailing violent tendencies. "We are her legal conservators," Thomas added smoothly. "The paperwork is processing through the courts. We ask that you release her into our custody so we can transport her to a psychiatric facility. If charged with assault, she will end up in the prison system. She is a sick woman. She belongs in a hospital, not a jail cell." They played their roles perfectly. Heartbroken parents desperate to save their unstable daughter from the criminal justice system. It was the exact tactic they used 15 years ago when they tried to lock me away just to seize the $5 million inheritance my grandfather left me. "Detective," I said, ignoring my parents entirely, "I am entitled to one phone call." "Do not let her near a phone," Barbara snapped, her motherly facade cracking. "She will call her broker and try to wire money out of her accounts to escape. She is having an episode." The detective frowned, looking from my mother's panicked face to my calm demeanor. "She has the right to a phone call. That is the law." He slid a desk phone across the metal table. Thomas crossed his arms, staring me down, confident that whoever I called would be powerless against his medical documents and his carefully crafted narrative. I picked up the receiver and dialed a Washington area code. I did not call a defense attorney. I called the direct, secure line of federal judge Marcus Vance. As a forensic accountant for the IRS, I spent 5 years tracing offshore shell companies for his task force. We were building a massive racketeering case, and he knew my psychological profile better than anyone. The secure line clicked open on the second ring. "Vance," the gruff older voice answered. "Judge Vance, this is Cassidy Wilson," I said. "I am detained at the 4th Precinct in Boston. My family is attempting to have me involuntarily committed using fraudulent medical records to facilitate a $2 million theft." "Hold the line," Judge Vance said. The phone went silent. Thomas let out a harsh laugh. "Who was that? Are you calling imaginary judges now, Cassidy? You are making a fool of yourself." I placed the receiver back on the cradle and folded my hands. The detective looked uncertain, glancing at the phone and then at the binder. The silence in the room stretched out heavy and suffocating. My mother shifted nervously while my father maintained his arrogant smirk. They thought they had me trapped. 10 minutes later, the heavy door to the interrogation room swung open. It was not a patrol officer who entered, but the precinct captain himself. His expression was thunderous. He carried a tablet in his left hand. The detective immediately stood up, looking surprised by his commanding officer's sudden appearance. The captain did not look at me. He walked directly to the metal table, picked up the binder of medical records my mother had provided, and tossed it into the trash can by the door. "Captain, what are you doing?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising in sudden panic. "Those are confidential medical records proving my daughter is a danger to society." "We cannot hold her," the captain said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. He tapped the screen of his tablet and set it down on the table facing my parents. "The security footage from the cafe just came in. It clearly shows your other daughter swapping coffee cups, consuming a substance, and then intentionally throwing herself backward into the pastry case without anyone touching her." Barbara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she stared at the crystal-clear video playing on the tablet screen. The captain then turned his piercing gaze directly onto my father. "But Mr. Thomas," the captain said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "I have some very serious questions about why you just tried to hand my desk sergeant an envelope containing $10,000 in cash." My father's face went completely ashen. He opened his mouth, stammering about a massive misunderstanding, claiming the money was a donation to the police benevolent fund. The captain did not even blink. He signaled the tired detective, who immediately stepped forward and read Thomas his Miranda rights. My mother shrieked, her hands flying to her face as the detective pulled my father's arms behind his back. The extreme arrogance that had defined Thomas his entire life vanished, replaced by the stark terror of a man realizing his vast wealth could not buy his way out of a federal judge's direct intervention. The captain turned to me, unlocked my heavy handcuffs, and handed me my personal belongings. He apologized for the severe inconvenience, assuring me the assault charges were formally dropped. I walked out the heavy glass doors of the precinct into the crisp Boston night. The air tasted incredibly sweet. I had won the battle, but as I powered on my cell phone, I realized my family had already launched a massive new offensive. My phone vibrated violently in my hand, overheating as hundreds of notifications flooded the screen. There were missed calls, furious text messages, and relentless social media alerts. I tapped on a message from my cousin Jenna. It contained a single link with the text asking how I could do something so evil. I clicked the link. It opened a video Penelope had posted to every major social media platform. She was sitting on a hospital bed, bathed in harsh fluorescent light. Around her neck sat a thick, rigid medical collar. She looked directly into the camera, squeezing out perfect, calculated tears. The caption below the video read, "Surviving my sister's violent psychotic break." I turned up the volume, listening to her shaky, rehearsed voice. Penelope sobbed, claiming she had only wanted to help me get psychiatric treatment. She narrated a fabricated story about me lunging across the cafe table, clawing at her face, and hurling her into the glass display case. She painted herself as the devoted, heartbroken older sister who had finally become a victim of my supposed untreated mental illness. The video had already amassed 250,000 views. The comment section was a cesspool of outrage, filled with strangers demanding I be locked away in an asylum immediately. My family had mobilized their network with terrifying speed. My text inbox was a war zone of vitriol from relatives who had not spoken to me in years. Aunt Jillian sent a massive paragraph calling me a feral animal who deserved to be institutionalized. Uncle Robert texted that I was dead to him, completely disowning me for breaking my sister's neck. Cousins I played with as a child flooded my social media pages with snake emojis and death threats. They had all swallowed Barbara and Penelope's narrative without a single question. In their eyes, I was exactly what my parents had always claimed I was, a defective, dangerous liability. The smear campaign extended far beyond family gossip. Terrence had recognized an opportunity to perform damage control for his own failing reputation. I found an exclusive interview he had just given to a prominent local lifestyle blog. The headline flashed across my screen. Real estate broker Terrence Miller halts business to care for brutally attacked wife. The article featured a high-quality photograph of Terrence kissing Penelope's forehead in the emergency room. In the interview, Terrence played the role of the exhausted but steadfast husband perfectly. He claimed his real estate brokerage was suffering because he was dedicating all his time and resources to protecting his family from a volatile relative. He explicitly stated my parents were stepping in to take legal conservatorship over my affairs because I had become a severe threat to public safety. He used his platform to legitimize the conservatorship petition, publicly branding me as a violent psychopath while positioning himself as a selfless protector. He was controlling the narrative to excuse his upcoming bankruptcy, shifting the blame for his financial ruin onto my supposed mental breakdown. They were trying to destroy me in the court of public opinion before we stepped foot inside a real courtroom. They knew the judge presiding over the conservatorship hearing would see the media circus. They wanted to create so much noise, so much outrage, that placing me under a conservatorship would look like a public service rather than a financial hijacking. I walked toward my car, ignoring the hateful messages still rolling in. I knew the cafe security footage cleared me of criminal charges, but proving my innocence to the police was vastly different from proving my competence to an overly cautious probate judge. The public pressure my parents were manufacturing was a strategic masterpiece. I needed to formulate a counterattack immediately. I opened my encrypted email to contact my legal team. At the top of my inbox sat an urgent message from Director Hughes, my commanding officer at the federal agency. The subject line was flagged with bright red high-priority markers. I tapped the email, my eyes scanning the brief, sterile text. The message stated that the agency's internal monitoring system had flagged Penelope's viral video. Due to the severe allegations of violent conduct and mental instability currently circulating in the public domain, protocol demanded immediate action. The federal government does not take risks with financial auditors. Director Hughes wrote that effective immediately, my security clearance was suspended, pending a full psychological investigation. My access to all federal databases, tracking software, and agency resources was permanently revoked. I was officially placed on unpaid administrative leave. I stared at the screen as the cold reality set in. My parents had not just ruined my reputation. They had successfully severed my only source of income and stripped me of the exact federal tools I needed to expose their Cayman Islands money laundering scheme. I was completely jobless, publicly disgraced, and entirely cut off from my resources just 3 days before the conservatorship hearing. The glaring screen of my phone illuminated the dark interior of my car. I read Director Hughes's email a second time. Mandatory suspension of security clearance. Unpaid administrative leave. The harsh words felt like physical blows to my chest. My parents and Penelope had not merely executed a successful smear campaign, they had surgically removed my only shield. Without my federal credentials, my access to the secure tracing software was gone. Without my salary, my ability to retain a high-powered defense attorney was severely crippled. They had orchestrated this, perfectly timing the viral video to trigger standard bureaucratic protocols, ensuring I was completely defenseless and isolated just 3 days before the conservatorship hearing. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. I rested my forehead against the cold leather of the steering wheel. I could feel the panic clawing at the edges of my mind, threatening to pull me under. But I refused to grant them that victory. I took a slow, deep breath, visualizing the chaotic emotions and locking them away. Cold, calculated logic was my only remaining currency. If they wanted a war, I would give them one. I threw the car into drive and sped back to my penthouse. I ignored the notifications vibrating relentlessly on my phone. The digital mob was irrelevant right now. Upon entering my apartment, I bypassed the home office where my now useless federal laptop sat. Instead, I walked straight to my bedroom closet, pulling up the false floorboard hidden in the back corner. Inside rested a heavy, reinforced steel lockbox. I punched in the complex code and retrieved my personal, completely sanitized laptop. It was a custom-built machine, heavily encrypted, and entirely untethered from any government network or tracking protocol. I carried it to my dining table, cracked it open, and tethered it to an encrypted offshore proxy. I was flying blind without my agency tools, but I was far from powerless. When I had traced Terrence's $2 million loan to the Cayman Islands earlier that week, I had noticed something peculiar about the digital architecture of Vanguard luxury estates. Terrence had paid for top-tier front-end security to impress his wealthy clients, but his back-end administrative cloud storage was routed through a shockingly outdated legacy server. It was a classic mistake made by arrogant men who believed their wealth made them untouchable. I initiated a targeted backdoor exploit focusing on the unpatched vulnerability in his server's authentication protocol. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing lines of code, bypassing the firewalls with practiced ease. Within 12 minutes, the screen flashed green. I was inside the central nervous system of Vanguard Luxury Estates. I immediately bypassed the public-facing marketing materials, the glossy brochures, and the fake client testimonials. I dove straight into the hidden financial directories. I opened the master ledger, my eyes scanning the endless rows of high-value transactions. It only took a few minutes of cross-referencing the incoming international wire transfers with the property deeds to uncover the absolute truth. The scale of the fraud was staggering. Terrence was not just mismanaging a failing real estate brokerage, he was operating a massive multinational Ponzi scheme. I opened a folder labeled Miami Acquisitions and compared it to Dubai Holdings. He was selling the exact same luxury properties to multiple foreign investors simultaneously. A $20 million beachfront estate had been sold in full to a Russian syndicate, a Chinese manufacturing magnate, and a British hedge fund. None of the buyers knew about each other. Terrence was collecting massive down payments and full purchase prices, using the new money to pay off the interest to the old investors, all while the actual properties remained locked in endless escrow disputes and legal limbo. But the most sickening revelation was yet to come. I traced the outgoing fractured payments, tracking exactly how Terrence was washing the stolen millions before routing them to the Cayman Islands. The money did not flow directly offshore. It was first funneled through a domestic shell company listed in the ledger as Apex Heritage Consulting. I pulled the incorporation documents for Apex Heritage from the state registry. My blood ran cold as the name of the primary shareholder loaded on the bright screen. It was Thomas, my father. The realization slammed into me with the force of a train. Thomas was not just blindly supporting his favorite son-in-law. He was the primary money launderer for the entire operation. My father was using his established, pristine reputation in the Boston business community to clean Terrence's dirty money. The conservatorship, the forged medical records, the viral video. It was all designed to neutralize me because I was a federal forensic accountant who had accidentally stumbled too close to their massive criminal empire. They were terrified I would look into Vanguard's books. I urgently needed to extract every single byte of this data immediately. This was the silver bullet that would not only destroy the conservatorship petition, but put my father and brother-in-law in federal prison for decades. I highlighted the entire master directory, containing thousands of PDFs, ledgers, and incriminating emails. I connected a secure flash drive and initiated a mass download to the encrypted external memory. A progress bar appeared estimating 20 minutes to completion. I watched the green bar inch forward, my pulse pounding loudly in my ears. Only 15%, 30%. I was so close to having everything I needed to end this nightmare. 50%. Suddenly, the progress bar froze completely in place. The cooling fans on my laptop whined aggressively as the processor spiked. The screen flickered, tearing with lines of static. A bright red notification box popped up in the center of my screen, blocking the download window entirely. I leaned in, my heart stopping as I read the harsh white text. Warning: target device is currently mirroring your connection. Terrence's IT guy had just caught me deep in the system. I did not freeze. I slammed my palm down on the escape key sequence, triggering a massive data scramble script I had written specifically for these scenarios. The progress bar for my download stuttered at 99%. The red warning box flashed violently as the opposing administrator tried to remotely sever my connection. I held my breath, watching the kilobytes tick upward. The bar hit 100%. I yanked the encrypted flash drive from the USB port mere milliseconds before the server crashed, locking us both out. I slipped the drive into my pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had the evidence. I had the ledger connecting Thomas and Terrence to the Caymans. Before I could even disconnect from the proxy server, a heavy rhythmic pounding echoed through my penthouse. It was not the polite knock of a concierge. It was violent and demanding. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. My building had 24-hour security. No one should have made it up the private elevator without my explicit authorization. The pounding stopped, replaced by the distinct metallic click of a master key turning in the heavy deadbolt. Penelope had given him my spare key. The heavy oak door swung open, hitting the foyer wall with a deafening crack. Terrence stepped inside, kicking the door shut behind him. He looked nothing like the polished, charismatic real estate broker who graced the covers of local luxury magazines. His designer tie was torn open, his shirt wrinkled and stained with sweat. His eyes were wild, darting around my living room until they locked onto me standing by the dining table. He was alone, and he was absolutely desperate. He knew I had the files. "Give it to me," Terrence snarled, taking a slow, predatory step forward. I kept the heavy oak table between us. "You are trespassing. Leave now, or I will call the police." Wham! Terrence laughed, a harsh, grating sound that bounced off the high ceilings. He continued advancing, forcing me to back up toward the hallway. "The police! You think the police are going to help a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic? Your mother already filed the preliminary psychiatric hold with the precinct. You are a documented liability, Cassidy." He lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the dining table and shoving it aside with terrifying strength. I stumbled backward, my shoulders hitting the hallway wall. Terrence closed the distance, trapping me in the narrow corridor. He smelled of stale whiskey and sheer panic. He slammed his hand against the wall right next to my head, leaning in so close I could feel his jagged breaths on my face. "Your sister told me you were weak." Terrence spat, his voice trembling with manic rage. "A little runaway who cleaned toilets to pay for tuition. She said you would cave the second we put the pressure on, but you had to go snooping. You had to hack my servers, sign over the trust fund to cover my deficit, or I swear to God I will make sure the conservatorship judge locks you in a psych ward permanently." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled legal document, shoving it against my chest. It was a complete transfer of power, signing away my grandfather's $5 million directly into Vanguard Luxury Estates' primary holding account. "Sign it!" Terrence roared, raising his hand. "Or I will break your arm and forge it myself." I did not cower. I looked directly into his bloodshot eyes and slowly raised my left hand. Terrence grinned, thinking I was surrendering, thinking I was reaching for the pen tucked into his breast pocket. Instead, my thumb found the small tactile button hidden on the side of my tactical smartwatch. I pressed it twice in rapid succession. The acoustic disruption alarm triggered instantly. A deafening, ultra-high-frequency siren exploded from the smartwatch speaker. The sound was not just loud, it was physically agonizing, designed to disrupt the inner ear and cause immediate blinding vertigo. Terrence screamed, dropping the legal papers as his hands flew to his ears. His eyes squeezed shut in absolute agony. He lost his balance, his knees buckling as the acoustic waves scrambled his equilibrium. He crashed hard onto the hardwood floor, writhing and cursing as he tried to escape the piercing frequency. I did not wait for him to recover. I grabbed my keys from the console table, sidestepped his thrashing body, and sprinted out the front door. I hit the stairwell, bypassing the elevator entirely. I flew down 3 flights of stairs, my boots slapping loudly against the concrete steps. I did not stop running until I burst through the emergency exit into the damp, cold alleyway behind my building. The encrypted flash drive bumped securely against my hip inside my pocket. I leaned against the brick wall of the alley, gasping for air, the cold night wind biting at my lungs. I was safe for the moment, but Terrence would not stay incapacitated forever. I pulled my cell phone from my heavy jacket to call Judge Vance back, hoping that he could offer some immediate tactical advice. The brightly lit screen completely illuminated the dark alley, but before I could dial the secure federal number, a high-priority system alert suddenly overrode my display. It was a formal notification from the state probate court, forwarded automatically to my secure personal email. I opened the urgent message, my eyes scanning the bold digitized text scrolling across the screen. The official notification confirmed immediate receipt of an emergency psychiatric petition legally filed by Thomas and Barbara Wilson. Due to the severe nature of the alleged violent incidents, including the highly publicized fabricated assault on my sister at the cafe, the standard mandatory waiting period had been completely waived. The conservatorship hearing had been drastically fast-tracked by a judge. I had to face them in court in exactly 12 hours. The 12-hour countdown felt less like a deadline and more like a ticking time bomb strapped directly to my chest. I did not sleep. I spent every remaining minute of the night locked inside my attorney's downtown office. Evelyn Vance was a former federal prosecutor with ice in her veins and a reputation for dismantling hostile witnesses for sport. When I handed her the encrypted drive containing Terrence's server data, she did not flinch. She simply ordered a fresh pot of coffee and began systematically dismantling my family's legal strategy. By the time the sun rose over the Boston skyline, we had a weaponized counterattack prepared. We walked into the Suffolk County Probate Court at precisely 8 in the morning. The heavy mahogany doors swung open to reveal the suffocating tension inside the courtroom. My family had arrived early to secure their positions and perfect their optics. Penelope sat in the front row, still wearing that ridiculous rigid cervical collar, dabbing her dry eyes with a monogrammed tissue. Terrence hovered protectively beside her, playing the role of the traumatized husband, completely ignoring the fact that less than 12 hours ago, he had tried to physically assault me in my own hallway. My parents sat directly behind their high-priced attorney, projecting an aura of concerned, heartbroken caretakers. They did not look at me as I took my seat next to Evelyn. Judge Harrison presided over the hearing. He was a stern, uncompromising man who immediately signaled his impatience with courtroom theatrics. My father's attorney wasted no time calling their star witness to the stand. Dr. Marcus Aris adjusted his designer suit as he swore the oath and settled into the witness box. He exuded an arrogant, polished confidence, resting his hands casually on the wooden railing. He was the chief of psychiatry at an exclusive private clinic, a man whose exorbitant retainer fee guaranteed he would say exactly what his wealthy clients needed to hear. Under direct examination, Dr. Aris painted a clinical portrait of my mental state. He testified with supreme authority, claiming he had conducted a comprehensive psychological evaluation based entirely on behavioral reports provided by my concerned family members. According to his expert medical opinion, I was suffering from acute paranoid schizophrenia, accompanied by severe delusions of persecution. He looked directly at Judge Harrison, his voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. He claimed my recent actions, including my supposed violent outburst at the cafe, were classic symptoms of a psychotic break. He went on to describe my financial irresponsibility, citing my refusal to merge my assets with the family trust as evidence of a reckless lifestyle and a complete detachment from reality. He concluded that I posed an imminent danger to myself and the public, insisting that a full medical and financial conservatorship under my father's control was the only responsible course of action. My parents nodded solemnly in the background, playing their parts flawlessly. Dr. Aris smiled a self-satisfied smile as their attorney concluded his questioning. He thought he had won. He thought he had just permanently erased my autonomy with a few minutes of rehearsed medical jargon. Evelyn stood up. She did not carry a notepad. She did not bring any medical textbooks to the podium. She walked slowly toward the witness box, her heels echoing sharply in the silent courtroom. She possessed a terrifying stillness that immediately wiped the smug smile off the doctor's face. She did not ask him about his medical diagnosis. She did not question his evaluation methods or challenge his clinical definition of schizophrenia. Instead, Evelyn stopped a few feet from the stand, her gaze locked onto him like a predator. Dr. Eris. Evelyn began, her voice perfectly even, but carrying a razor-sharp edge. You run a very lucrative private practice, do you not? Dr. Eris stiffened, clearly thrown by the non-medical opening. I operate a highly respected psychiatric clinic, yes. Highly respected, Evelyn repeated slowly. And highly profitable. You cater exclusively to the ultra-wealthy, families who require absolute discretion when dealing with embarrassing legal matters. My father's attorney jumped up loudly, objecting to relevance. Judge Harrison frowned but overruled it, instructing Evelyn to get to the point quickly. Evelyn stepped closer to the witness stand. Dr. Eris, are you familiar with the banking institution known as Cayman Atlantic Fidelity? The color drained from the doctor's face. His polished facade shattered, replaced by a sudden, rigid panic. His eyes darted toward my father in the gallery, then back to Evelyn. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie with a trembling hand. I am aware of various international banks, yes. That is not a crime. No, it is not a crime to be aware of a bank, Evelyn agreed. She reached into her suit pocket and pulled out a sheet of paper. She walked over and slapped the document face up onto the wooden ledge directly in front of him. But it is a crime to commit perjury during a conservatorship hearing. Dr. Eris stared down at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Dr. Eris, Evelyn commanded, her voice ringing out across the stunned courtroom. I am not going to ask you about your medical expertise today. I want you to look at the highlighted section on that bank record. I want you to read the routing number aloud for the court. The doctor swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. I do not see how this pertains to my medical evaluation of the patient. Read the routing number, Evelyn demanded, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. He stammered, reading off the string of digits, his voice barely a whisper. Evelyn turned her back to him, facing Judge Harrison. She reached into her pocket again and produced a matching printed receipt, holding it up high. Dr. Eris, can you explain to the court why Thomas wired $150,000 into your offshore account precisely 24 hours before you signed the psychiatric evaluation? Dr. Eris stared at the piece of paper, his jaw working silently. He looked at my father, whose face had gone dangerously pale, and then back to Evelyn. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. When the doctor finally spoke, his voice was a thin, raspy croak. He claimed it was a consulting fee for an unrelated corporate wellness program. Evelyn did not even dignify his lie with a response. She simply handed the judge a copy of the wire transfer, smiled tightly, and stated she had no further questions for the compromised doctor. Dr. Eris practically ran from the witness box. My father's attorney, scrambling to regain control of the narrative, immediately called Barbara to the stand. My mother walked up the aisle with slow, deliberate steps, gripping the wooden rail of the witness box, as if she needed it to keep from collapsing. She wore a modest, high-necked blouse, devoid of her usual ostentatious jewelry. The moment she sat down, the tears began. It was a masterful performance. She wept openly, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She spoke in a trembling, fragile voice about how much she loved me, how it absolutely broke a mother's heart to watch her youngest child's mind slowly deteriorate into madness. She spun a tragic tale of a family desperately trying to save a daughter from herself, painting my independence as isolation and my career as a symptom of mania. Cassidy has always been so troubled, Barbara sobbed, looking beseechingly at Judge Harrison. She has harbored this deep, toxic jealousy toward her sister since they were children. It eats away at her. She constantly tries to destroy Penelope's happiness. It breaks my heart to say this, but she even stole Penelope's engagement ring just to ruin the wedding. We hid the truth to protect her, but her sickness has completely taken over. A loud murmur rippled through the gallery. Penelope let out a dramatic, muffled sob from the front row, leaning her head onto Terrence's shoulder. Evelyn stood up, her face an unreadable mask. She approached the podium completely unaffected by my mother's theatrics. Mrs. Wilson, you are claiming under oath that Cassidy stole her sister's engagement ring. Evelyn asked, her tone conversational. Yes, Barbara cried, clutching her handkerchief to her chest. We tore the house apart. Cassidy hated that Penelope was getting married. She took it out of pure spite. I see, Evelyn said. She reached into her sleek briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. It is fascinating that you bring up that specific ring, Mrs. Wilson, especially since we obtained the security footage and the transaction receipt from a high-end pawn shop in downtown Boston. The date is exactly 3 days before Penelope's wedding. Evelyn handed the documents to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge and then to the witness box. Would you please read the name on that pawnshop receipt, Mrs. Wilson? Evelyn asked. Barbara stared at the paper. The color drained from her face, leaving her perfectly applied rouge looking garish against her pale skin. Her mouth opened, but she remained silent. If you will not read it, I will, Evelyn stated loudly. The ring was pawned for $40,000 by Terrence Miller. Furthermore, I have bank records showing that exact sum was immediately wired to an offshore sports betting syndicate to cover a massive outstanding gambling debt. Tell me, Mrs. Wilson, did Cassidy somehow hypnotize her brother-in-law into pawning his own bride's ring to pay off his illicit gambling debts? Terrence shot out of his seat in the gallery, his face purple with rage, before my father grabbed his arm and yanked him back down. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel, demanding order in the court. He glared at Terrence, warning him that one more outburst would result in his immediate removal. Barbara gripped the edge of the witness stand, her tears completely vanishing. Her eyes narrowed into cold, calculating slits as she glared at Evelyn. My son-in-law's personal financial matters have nothing to do with my daughter's severe mental instability. Oh, I believe they have everything to do with it, Evelyn countered smoothly. Because this entire conservatorship petition is not about mental health. It is about money. Specifically, Cassidy's grandfather's trust fund, which she gains full control of on her 32nd birthday next month. That is a lie, Barbara snapped, dropping the Fragile Mother Act entirely. We are trying to save her life. Are you? Evelyn asked. She tapped a button on her tablet. Your Honor, the defense submits Exhibit C into evidence. A voicemail extracted from a backup of Penelope Miller's phone, saved to a secondary cloud account. Evelyn did not wait for an objection. She pressed play. The audio echoed through the courtroom speakers, crisp and undeniably clear. It was Barbara's voice, cold, ruthless, and impatient. Just keep provoking her until she snaps. Penelope, I need you to focus. Let her yell, let her make a scene. Once we get the conservatorship, I am sending her to that residential facility in Utah. The doctor is already paid for. She will be locked away, and we can finally use her trust fund to buy the yacht before your father's partners realize we are over-leveraged. The courtroom erupted. Reporters in the back rows began typing frantically. My mother sat frozen in the witness stand, her jaw slack, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. The mask had slipped, and the hideous reality beneath was fully exposed for the judge to see. Penelope was frantically shaking her head in the gallery, trying to shrink away from the burning stares of everyone in the room. Judge Harrison's face darkened with absolute fury. He slammed his gavel repeatedly, the sharp cracks cutting through the rising, chaotic noise of the gallery. He turned his piercing gaze directly onto my parents' attorney, his expression promising severe legal consequences for filing a fraudulent petition. My father's attorney was visibly sweating. He looked at Thomas, panic evident in his wide eyes. The case was disintegrating rapidly. Evelyn had systematically dismantled their medical expert and exposed their primary witness as a manipulative fraud. The financial motivation behind the conservatorship was now a matter of public record. But Thomas Wilson did not build a criminal empire by surrendering easily. He gave his lawyer a sharp, imperative nod. The attorney swallowed hard, smoothing his jacket as he stood up. Your Honor, he said, his voice trembling slightly before he forced it into a steady rhythm. The petitioners recognize the defense has presented highly irregular evidence. However, we have one final witness who can definitively speak to Cassidy Wilson's current dangerous state of mind. We call our surprise witness to the stand. Penelope rose from the front row, her movements exaggerated and painfully slow. She adjusted the thick, rigid medical collar around her neck, letting out a soft, rehearsed whimper that echoed through the silent courtroom. She gripped the wooden railing, projecting the ultimate image of a fragile victim. Terrence watched her from the gallery with a smug, satisfied smirk. They thought this was their trump card. They believed a display of physical trauma would overshadow the financial bombshells Evelyn had detonated. Judge Harrison leaned forward. His eyes narrowed as he assessed my sister. "State your name for the record," he instructed, his tone clipped and devoid of the sympathy Penelope was clearly fishing for. "Penelope Miller." She answered, her voice trembling perfectly. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, avoiding my gaze completely. My father's attorney approached the podium. He led Penelope through her fabricated narrative. She recounted the afternoon at the cafe, painting a picture of a sisterly intervention gone violently wrong. Then came the climax of her lie. She claimed I suddenly lunged across the table without provocation, my eyes wild with psychosis. She testified that I shoved her with unnatural strength, hurling her backward into the pastry display case and fracturing her cervical vertebrae. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller," the opposing attorney said, stepping back with a confident nod. "No further questions." Evelyn did not even wait for the judge to prompt her. She was already out of her chair, striding toward the center of the room. She carried a sleek black tablet. She did not look angry. She looked utterly bored. "Mrs. Miller," Evelyn began, her voice ringing clear, "you are testifying today that your sister Cassidy violently assaulted you. You are stating for the official court record that her unprovoked physical attack is the direct cause of your severe spinal injuries, necessitating that dramatic brace you are wearing." "Yes," Penelope cried, clutching the edges of the witness stand. "It was the most terrifying moment of my entire life. I thought she was going to kill me." "Fascinating," Evelyn replied coldly, "because your narrative lacks a foundation in reality. Your Honor, the defense submits Exhibit D into evidence. We legally obtained the raw security footage from the cafe. The establishment recently upgraded its surveillance system to ultra-high-definition 4K cameras. I would like to project this footage." Judge Harrison nodded immediately, his expression hardening as he looked at Penelope. "Proceed." Evelyn calmly tapped her tablet, syncing it to the large flat monitor. The screen flickered to life, displaying a crystal-clear, elevated view of the cafe table where Penelope and I had met. Every detail, every movement was captured in stark, undeniable high definition. The video played in absolute silence, making the actions on screen speak volumes. The courtroom watched as the digital version of Penelope reached into her designer handbag, while my back was turned toward the barista counter. "Watch closely," Evelyn instructed the silent room. On the screen, Penelope's hand emerged from her bag, clutching a small vial. With hurried, calculated movements, she uncapped the vial and dumped its contents directly into my iced coffee. The liquid dissolved instantly. A collective gasp ripped through the gallery. My mother's face drained of all color. Terrence gripped the back of the pew in front of him, his knuckles turning white. "Is that part of the sisterly intervention, Mrs. Miller?" Evelyn asked, her voice dripping with lethal sarcasm. "Drugging your sibling in a public establishment?" Penelope stammered, her hands shaking violently. "That is not. I was just adding sweetener to her drink. She likes sweetener." "Let us continue," Evelyn stated, ignoring the pathetic lie. The footage rolled forward. It showed me returning to the table, sitting down and looking at my sister. Then it captured the exact moment I casually reached out, sliding my allegedly spiked coffee toward her, while pulling her untouched drink toward me. The camera caught the sheer, unadulterated panic flashing across Penelope's face as she realized I had swapped the cups. Then came the moment of truth. The footage showed me leaning back in my chair. My hands were planted flat and motionless on the wooden table. I did not move a single muscle. On the screen, Penelope stood up abruptly. She grabbed the edge of the table, took a deep breath, and threw herself backward. She launched her own body through the air, crashing intentionally into the glass display case behind her. My hands never left the table. I had not touched her. Evelyn paused the video right on the frame of Penelope throwing herself backward. The evidence was irrefutable. It was a perfectly executed, entirely self-inflicted injury designed to frame me for assault. The silence in the courtroom was deafening heavy with the weight of absolute exposure. The carefully constructed illusion of my insanity had just been publicly obliterated by cold, hard digital truth. Judge Harrison leaned over his desk. His face was a mask of contained judicial wrath. He stared down at Penelope, who was trembling uncontrollably, her fake tears replaced by genuine, suffocating panic. She looked at our parents, but Thomas had turned his face away, realizing the battle was lost. "Mrs. Miller," Judge Harrison boomed, his voice echoing like thunder against the mahogany walls. "You are currently under oath in my courtroom. You have just provided sworn testimony that directly contradicts irrefutable video evidence. Are you fully aware of the mandatory penalty for committing perjury and attempting to defraud this court?" Penelope's breath hitched. She began hyperventilating, the rigid neck collar suddenly looking like a chokehold. The walls were closing in on her. She realized in that solitary, terrifying moment that her family was not going to save her. Thomas and Barbara were distancing themselves. She was going to take the fall for the entire conspiracy, facing real prison time for a botched, fraudulent setup. Penelope choked out, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the microphone. The harsh reality of a federal perjury charge broke whatever remaining loyalty she harbored. She spun around in the witness box, her eyes wide and frantic, and pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at her husband in the gallery. "He made me do it!" The courtroom exploded into absolute chaos. Penelope's shrill accusation hung in the air, a lethal weapon aimed directly at her own husband. Terrence lunged out of his seat, his face a horrifying shade of crimson, violently shaking his head. He looked desperately at Thomas, seeking a lifeline from the patriarch who usually orchestrated their escapes, but my father sat completely paralyzed, staring at the floor. The united front of the Wilson family was rapidly devouring itself. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel with such force that the wooden handle groaned. He commanded order, his voice booming across the polished mahogany panels, threatening to clear the gallery if the disruption continued. He fixed his furious gaze on Terrence, pointing a stern finger toward the front of the room. He ordered Terrence to take the stand immediately. The opposing attorney practically tripped over his own briefcase trying to intervene. He stammered out frantic objections, citing spousal privilege and improper procedure, desperately trying to shield Terrence from Evelyn's cross-examination. Judge Harrison leaned over the bench, his expression turning downright lethal. He reminded the attorney that Terrence had enthusiastically submitted a sworn affidavit supporting the medical conservatorship just yesterday. That document made him a hostile, relevant witness in a civil probate hearing. The judge overruled every objection and ordered the bailiff to escort Terrence to the witness box. Terrence practically marched down the aisle. Despite the catastrophic collapse of Penelope's testimony moments prior, he still clung to his trademark arrogance. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke suit, offering a slick, practiced smile as he took the oath. He settled into the chair, crossing one ankle over his knee, projecting the image of a reasonable, successful man caught in a storm of female hysteria. His attorney approached the podium with visible trepidation, trying to toss soft questions to repair the damage. Terrence caught them flawlessly. He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples in a display of profound manufactured exhaustion. "My wife is clearly suffering from immense emotional distress, Your Honor," Terrence stated smoothly, casting a pitying look toward Penelope, who was now quietly hyperventilating in the front row. The stress of planning a grand wedding, combined with the tragic reality of watching her sister's mental decline, has severely impacted her judgment. She is prone to dramatic exaggerations. I love her dearly, but her testimony today is simply the result of acute anxiety and panic. She needs rest, not an interrogation. He pivoted seamlessly, shifting his attack directly onto me. He leaned forward, adopting the confident, authoritative posture he used when closing luxury real estate deals. He told the judge that the focus needed to remain on the core issue, which was my absolute inability to manage my own life and finances. "I am a fully licensed, highly successful real estate broker, Your Honor," Terrence testified, puffing out his chest. "I manage Vanguard luxury estates. I deal with complex asset protection every single day. I have personally reviewed Cassidy's financial portfolio, and I can say with absolute professional certainty that she is squandering her wealth. She makes erratic, impulsive choices. She refuses basic financial guidance. If this court does not grant Thomas full control over her accounts and the upcoming trust distribution, Cassidy will be entirely bankrupt within 6 months. I was simply trying to protect the family legacy from a financially incompetent, deeply unwell individual. Evelyn did not object. She let him talk. She let him build his pedestal of financial superiority as high as possible. When he finally finished his arrogant monologue, she stood up from her chair. She grabbed a remarkably thick black leather binder from our defense table. It was the physical manifestation of the data I had stolen from his servers the night before. She walked toward the witness box with slow, predatory grace. The silence in the courtroom grew suffocating. Terrence's slick smile faltered slightly as he watched her approach. Evelyn dropped the heavy binder onto the wooden ledge directly in front of him. The thud echoed sharply. "Mr. Broker," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with lethal politeness. "You claim to be a financial expert. You claim to possess a superior understanding of asset protection. Could you please read the title of this document to the court?" Terrence looked down at the thick binder. The color instantly drained from his perfectly tanned face. His confident posture collapsed. He gripped the edges of the witness stand, his knuckles turning white as his eyes darted frantically across the bold black text printed on the cover page. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, but he remained completely silent. "I asked you a direct question, Mr. Miller," Evelyn demanded, stepping closer. "Read the title of the document." "This is highly irregular?" Terrence stammered, his slick voice replaced by a breathless, terrified wheeze. "This has absolutely nothing to do with a medical conservatorship. I refuse to read this." "You refuse because reading it aloud would shatter your entire fraudulent existence," Evelyn countered, turning her back to him and facing Judge Harrison. "Since the witness is suddenly struggling with his literacy, I will read it for the official record." Evelyn picked up the binder and opened the cover. Her voice rang out clear and authoritative, commanding the attention of every single person in the room. "Your Honor, this document is a sealed federal indictment, prepared in conjunction with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, utilizing raw data directly extracted from Vanguard private servers. This man sitting in your witness box is not a financial expert. He is not a concerned family member trying to protect his sister-in-law." Evelyn paused, letting the suffocating tension fully peak before delivering the killing blow. She looked directly at my parents, ensuring they heard every syllable of his destruction, then turned her unwavering gaze back toward the sweating man in the box. "He is currently the prime suspect in a $20 million massive Ponzi scheme, a criminal enterprise, which he has been actively funding by utilizing my client's forged signature." The silence following Evelyn's declaration was absolute, but it lasted only a fraction of a second before the gallery erupted into sheer bedlam. Terrence sat frozen in the witness box. His jaw unhinged, the arrogant sheen of his designer suit suddenly looking like the uniform of a condemned man. He looked toward his attorney, then toward the doors, visibly calculating whether he could simply run. My father's attorney leapt to his feet, frantically waving his arms and shouting objections over the rising roar of the courtroom. He demanded that Evelyn's statements be stricken from the record, claiming this was an outrageous ambush based on unverified allegations. Evelyn simply smiled, handing a certified copy of the federal indictment directly to the bailiff. Judge Harrison brought his gavel down with a resounding crack that echoed like a gunshot. He ordered the gallery to be completely silent. He informed Terrence's attorney that if the federal indictment was indeed genuine, the witness was in immediate risk of self-incrimination and had the right to secure separate specialized criminal counsel. Terrence did not wait for another invitation. He scrambled out of the witness box, his face slick with terrified sweat, and practically sprinted down the center aisle, leaving Penelope sobbing uncontrollably in the front row. The unified, impenetrable front of the Wilson family had just been reduced to a chaotic, scrambling mess of terrified individuals. But Thomas Wilson was not a man who retreated. He had spent his entire life bullying, manipulating, and crushing anyone who dared to oppose his carefully constructed empire. Watching his son-in-law flee and his wife tremble in disgrace did not invoke fear in him. It provoked pure, unadulterated rage. He shoved his chair back violently, the heavy wood scraping harshly against the floor. He ignored his attorney's desperate whispered pleas to remain seated and remain quiet. My father marched toward the front of the courtroom, his chest puffed out, his face a terrifying shade of crimson. He stepped into the witness box without waiting to be called. He gripped the wooden railing with large, meaty hands, leaning forward to glare directly at Judge Harrison. The mask of the grieving, concerned patriarch was gone entirely. In its place stood the tyrannical megalomaniac who had terrorized our household for over 3 decades. "I have heard enough of this absolute circus," Thomas bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "This is a conservatorship hearing, not a federal witch hunt against my family. I am the petitioner here. I am the one trying to save this ungrateful, deeply disturbed girl from destroying herself and dragging my family name through the mud." Judge Harrison narrowed his eyes, his posture rigid with judicial authority. He warned my father that he was out of order, reminding him that he had not been formally called to testify and that outbursts would not be tolerated in his courtroom. Thomas let out a harsh, barking laugh. He pointed a thick finger directly at me, his eyes blazing with a lifetime of resentment. "Order you want, order. I built this family, I gave her everything, clothes, private schools, a roof over her head. And how does she repay me by scheming to steal what is rightfully mine?" Evelyn remained completely calm. She stepped forward, her voice cutting cleanly through his escalating rant. "Mr. Wilson, since you have decided to voluntarily testify under oath, are you referring to the $5 million trust fund established by your late father?" "Of course I am talking about the trust fund," Thomas roared, completely disregarding his attorney who had buried his face in his hands. "That $5 million was supposed to be mine, not hers. My father was a fool to bypass me." He let a few disagreements about corporate strategy blind him to the fact that I was the only one capable of managing that kind of capital. He handed it over to a disrespectful, ungrateful little brat who needs to be put in her place permanently. She has spent her entire life trying to prove she is smarter than the man who put food on her plate. She is weak, she is erratic. She belongs in a facility where she can be properly managed. I had the doctors ready. All she had to do was sign the papers and hand over the accounts, and this could have been handled quietly. By locking your perfectly sane daughter in a psychiatric ward in Utah so you could use her inheritance to cover your massive corporate debts, Evelyn asked, her tone razor-sharp. "It is my money!" Thomas screamed, slamming his heavy fists down on the wooden ledge of the witness box. The loud thud made several people in the gallery jump. "It belongs to the Wilson estate. It belongs to me." Judge Harrison stood up, grasping his gavel. His expression was thunderous. "Mr. Wilson, you will cease this outburst immediately. You have openly admitted to attempting to commit medical fraud and financial theft in my courtroom. You will sit down and remain silent, or I will hold you in contempt and have the bailiffs place you in handcuffs." Thomas lost the last shred of his remaining sanity. He glared at the judge. "You do not tell me to sit down. You have no idea who you are dealing with. I have golfed with the governor. I have half the city council on my speed dial. I fund campaigns of men who could unseat you with a single phone call. You grant this conservatorship right now, or I swear to God I will personally ensure that your judicial career ends before the next election cycle." I slowly pushed my heavy wooden chair back and stood up. I looked directly at the stunned judge. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, clear, and carrying across the dead silence of the courtroom, "I formally request permission to take the stand. There is one final piece of evidence regarding the trust fund that the petitioners are entirely unaware of." Judge Harrison slowly lowered his heavy wooden gavel, his furious glare shifting from my father's flushed face to me standing resolutely at the defense table. The heavy silence in the courtroom was absolute. Thomas had just publicly admitted to initiating a fraudulent conservatorship for personal financial gain, effectively nuking his own legal standing. His attorney looked physically ill, slowly slumping back into his expensive leather chair with the completely defeated posture of a desperate man, frantically calculating his own massive malpractice liabilities. Evelyn turned and gave me a brief, very sharp nod of quiet approval. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, adjusting his black robes, and granted my request. He ordered my father to vacate the witness box immediately and return to his seat. Thomas did not move at first. He just stood there, tightly gripping the wooden rail, his chest heaving heavily, his eyes locked firmly onto me with pure, unadulterated venom. The bailiff stepped forward, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. My furious father finally let go, his knuckles stark white, and marched quickly back to the front row, throwing himself heavily down next to my openly weeping mother. I slowly walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floorboards. I did not rush. I felt an incredible sense of clarity. For 31 years I had shrunk away from conflict, absorbing their abuse, hiding my true capabilities to avoid triggering my father's wrath and my sister's manufactured victimhood. That era was over. I stepped into the witness box, placed my hand on the provided Bible, and swore to tell the whole truth. When I sat down, I adjusted the microphone and looked directly into my father's eyes. He sneered, expecting me to cower, expecting the weak, easily manipulated girl they had bullied for decades. I did not blink. I held his gaze with a cold, terrifying stillness. Evelyn approached this podium with measured grace. Cassidy, your father just testified that you are a reckless, financially incompetent individual who lacks the basic mental capacity to manage a $5 million trust fund. He claims you require a full conservatorship. Let us address your capacity. Could you please state your current profession for the court record? My father let out a loud, derisive snort from the gallery. She is a glorified clerk, Thomas interrupted, ignoring his lawyer's frantic attempts to shush him. She pushes papers for some mid-level accounting firm in Chicago. She makes $60,000 a year. She knows absolutely nothing about managing real wealth. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel. One more word, Mr. Wilson, and you will spend the night in a holding cell. He turned back to me, his tone softening slightly. Please answer the question, Miss Wilson. I leaned forward, keeping my eyes locked on Thomas. I do not push papers, Dad, and I have never worked for a mid-level accounting firm in Chicago. That was simply the cover story I provided to ensure you never dug too deeply into my actual life. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the silent room. I am a senior forensic fraud investigator for the federal government attached directly to the United States Department of the Treasury. My specific clearance level involves tracking, dismantling, and prosecuting multi-million-dollar corporate embezzlement rings and international money laundering syndicates. The collective gasp from my family was audible. My mother stopped crying instantly, her mouth falling open in shock. Penelope stared at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. Thomas gripped the armrests of his chair, the arrogant sneer completely wiped from his face. His eyes darted toward Terrence, who was already sweating profusely, looking desperately toward the exit doors. Thank you, Evelyn said smoothly, stepping closer to the witness box. Now, as a highly trained federal investigator specializing in complex financial crimes, did you ever review the structure of the $5 million trust fund left to you by your late grandfather? I did, I answered clearly. When I turned 17, my grandfather brought me into his office. He knew about my father's tyrannical nature. He knew Thomas was secretly siphoning assets from the primary family holding company to fund his extravagant lifestyle and cover his risky, over-leveraged investments. My grandfather established my trust independently, bypassing my father completely, to ensure I would have an absolute safety net. He also taught me exactly how to protect it. Evelyn nodded, picking up a sealed folder from our table. And how exactly did you protect it, Cassidy? Your father just testified that he simply needed to gain control of your accounts to manage the funds. He assumed the money was sitting in a standard locked brokerage account waiting for your 32nd birthday. I smiled. It was a small, cold smile that made my father physically recoil in his seat. My father assumed I was weak. He assumed I would run away and hide the money. But I did not just lock the money away. I knew that eventually his greed would outpace his caution. I knew that when his debts grew too large, he would try to seize my assets, using whatever legal loopholes or fraudulent medical claims he could manufacture. so I used my expertise. When I gained preliminary administrative access to the trust structure at age 18, I legally reclassified the entire portfolio. I turned my gaze away from Evelyn and looked directly down at my father. He was shaking his head, his face a mask of dawning horror. He finally understood that he had walked blindly into a trap that had been waiting for him for over a decade. I leaned into the microphone, making sure my voice carried to the very back of the gallery. Any unauthorized attempt to legally seize this trust automatically grants the IRS full jurisdiction to audit the financial history of the petitioners. You didn't just sue me for my money, Dad. You legally invited the federal government to audit 15 years of your tax fraud. The silence that followed my declarations suffocated the entire room. For 5 agonizing seconds, no one dared to breathe. Then the plaintiff table violently imploded. Total chaos erupted. Thomas stared at me, his eyes bulging against his skull as the horrifying reality of his miscalculation crashed over him. His face morphed from enraged crimson to a mottled, dangerous purple. He clawed at the knot of his expensive silk tie, fighting for air, gasping like a fish pulled onto a dry deck. The mighty patriarch who had controlled every narrative and crushed every dissenter for decades was experiencing a complete systems failure. Barbara, realizing her luxurious life was evaporating before her eyes, completely abandoned her sophisticated matriarch persona. She rounded on Terence with a speed and ferocity that rivaled a rabid animal. Her manicured hands slashed through the air as she shrieked at him, her voice entirely devoid of its usual polish. She blamed him for everything. She screamed that his sloppy financial maneuvering, arrogant greed, and idiotic insistence on using my forged signature had doomed them all. Terence cowered, throwing his hands up to shield his face, looking desperately around the room for an exit. His expensive lawyer had already backed away from the table, putting distance between himself and his radioactive clients. In the front row, Penelope was having her own private meltdown. The terrifying realization that her husband was a wanted criminal and her parents were legally ruined shattered her fragile, manufactured victimhood. Survival instinct overrode her theatrical performance. Her fingers clawed frantically at the thick medical collar wrapped around her neck. With a harsh, tearing sound of Velcro, she ripped the brace off entirely, revealing a perfectly healthy, uninjured neck. She dropped the prop onto the floor, kicking it under the pew. Crouching low to avoid his line of sight, she grabbed her designer handbag and began scooting toward the center aisle. Her eyes fixed desperately on the heavy oak double doors at the back of the courtroom. She thought she could sneak out and disappear, abandoning her family to face the federal wrath alone. Judge Harrison did not reach for his gavel to quell the screaming match. He simply watched the pathetic spectacle with profound disgust. His sharp gaze tracked Penelope as she attempted her hunched escape down the aisle. He cleared his throat, a sharp sound cutting through the shrill arguments. "Bailiff," Judge Harrison commanded, freezing the room instantly. "Inform Mrs. Miller that if she touches those doors, she will be confined to a holding cell. No one leaves this courtroom." Penelope froze mid-stride, her hand hovering just inches from the brass handle. She slowly turned around, her face completely drained of color, and slinked back to an empty seat in the last row, shrinking into herself. Judge Harrison turned his attention back to me. "Miss Wilson, pass those documents forward immediately." Evelyn took the sealed files from my hands and carried them up to the clerk, who handed them directly to the judge. The courtroom remained paralyzed as Judge Harrison broke the federal seal. The only sound in the mahogany-paneled room was the crisp rustling of heavy paper as he turned page after page. He read through the IRS authorizations. The Honeypot Trust triggers the detailed financial logs tracing his corporate debts and the undeniable evidence of fraudulent financial transfers. With every page, the lines around his mouth deepened into a fierce scowl. He adjusted his glasses, his jaw muscles clenching in visible anger. My family had just attempted to use his courtroom to facilitate a massive criminal conspiracy. After several agonizing minutes, Judge Harrison closed the thick file. He placed his hands flat on the polished wood of his desk, directing his lethal glare entirely at Thomas and his legal counsel. "Mr. Wilson, Judge Harrison began, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely witnessed such a brazen, arrogant, and thoroughly repulsive abuse of the judicial system. You attempted to weaponize a conservatorship to strip a perfectly capable federal investigator of her civil liberties, all to cover up your monumental financial crimes. Thomas opened his mouth, raising a trembling hand to argue, but the judge slammed his gavel down with a deafening crack, instantly silencing him. "You will not speak," Judge Harrison roared. "You have perjured yourself. You submitted fraudulent affidavits. You attempted to defraud a federal trust. This court finds your petition entirely baseless, malicious, and fundamentally criminal. Therefore, I am striking down this conservatorship petition with extreme prejudice. The request is denied." The finality of the ruling echoed like a death knell through the silent chamber. Thomas slumped forward, his face burying into his hands, the remnants of his formidable empire collapsing into dust. Barbara simply sat frozen, staring blankly at the wall, unable to process her complete social and financial destruction. Judge Harrison did not look away from them. He carefully gathered the federal documents, aligning the edges perfectly, before placing them back into the thick leather binder. He then lifted his chin, his expression turning terrifyingly calm. He looked directly past my broken family, past the stunned gallery, and locked eyes with someone standing at the very back of the courtroom. Slowly, deliberately, Judge Harrison gave a single firm nod. Instantly, the heavy oak double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a massive, echoing crash that startled the remaining gallery members into absolute silence. Heavy, synchronized footsteps pounded against the floorboards. 6 federal agents, moving with practiced tactical precision, marched straight down the center aisle. They wore dark windbreakers boldly emblazoned with FBI and IRSCI in bright yellow lettering. Their grim faces were carved from solid stone, their eyes fixed intently on Thomas and Terrence. The lead agent stopped directly behind the plaintiff table, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a thick stack of paperwork, his voice ringing with absolute authority as he unrolled the crisp white sheets holding arrest warrants. The lead agent did not hesitate. He bypassed the low wooden gate separating the gallery from the legal tables and stepped directly behind my father. The metallic clink of handcuffs being unpouched sliced through the heavy silence of the courtroom. "Thomas Wilson, Barbara Wilson, and Terrence Miller," the lead agent announced, his voice projecting with absolute, unwavering authority. "You are all under arrest. The federal warrants issued today cite multiple felony charges, including widespread wire fraud, aggravated perjury in a federal proceeding, severe tax evasion spanning over a decade, and conspiracy to commit identity theft." The reality of the situation hit the plaintiff table like a localized earthquake. The coordinated strike by the FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division was swift, brutal, and entirely inescapable. 2 agents grabbed Terrence first. He did not put up a fight. The arrogant broker instantly dissolved into a pathetic mess. The moment the cold steel snapped around his custom-tailored wrists, his knees buckled. He sank toward the floor, sobbing loudly. He twisted his neck, looking frantically toward the back of the room where my sister stood. "Penelope!" Terrence wailed, tears streaming down his flushed face, completely ignoring the federal agents hauling him upright. "Call the bank. Call my partners. You have to fix this, Penny. You have to help me. Tell them I did not know everything. Tell them Thomas made me do it." Penelope did not move. She stood perfectly paralyzed in the back row, clutching her handbag like a shield. Her eyes were wide, vacant pools of sheer terror. She watched her husband being dragged down the center aisle, but she offered absolutely nothing. No comfort, no promises, no defense. The illusion of their marriage had been obliterated, leaving behind a terrified woman who understood she was on her own. My father's reaction was drastically different. Thomas Wilson violently resisted. When the agents reached for his arms, he jerked away, his face turning an alarming shade of violent violet. He shoved his chair backward, shouting at the top of his lungs, pointing a trembling finger at the judge, then at Evelyn, and finally at me. "You cannot do this to me!" Thomas roared, spit flying from his lips as two large agents swiftly overpowered him, twisting his arms behind his back. I am a pillar of this community. I know the governor. Get your hands off me. Where is my lawyer? Call my attorney right now. You will all pay for this. I will sue this entire department into oblivion. The agents ignored his threats entirely. They locked the handcuffs into place with practiced efficiency, tightening the metal around his wrists. Thomas continued to scream, but the sheer panic beneath his bluster was finally visible. The tyrant who had controlled our lives through fear and financial manipulation was utterly powerless, reduced to a screaming man being hauled away by a force he could not bribe, intimidate, or bully. Then the most shocking fracture occurred. Barbara Wilson, the untouchable matriarch who had spent her entire life prioritizing social status, designer labels, and unyielding perfection, completely shattered. As a female agent approached her with handcuffs drawn, my mother let out a guttural, horrific shriek. She did not fight the agent. Instead, she fell to her knees right there on the hard courtroom floor. Her expensive skirt pooled around her as she scrambled forward, crawling toward the defense table. She reached her hands out toward me, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face, her makeup streaked with genuine, panicked tears. "Cassidy, please." Barbara wept, her voice cracking with raw desperation. "Please, sweetheart, you have to stop this. You are a federal investigator. You can talk to them. You can make this go away. We are your family. We are your blood. I am your mother. Please do not let them take me to prison. I will do anything you want. I will give you whatever you ask for. Just drop the charges. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." I stood completely still, looking down at the woman who had enabled my father's cruelty for over 3 decades. I watched her beg, pleading for the very mercy she had never once extended to me. I stepped out from behind the defense table and walked slowly toward her. I stopped just a few feet away, looking down into her terrified, tear-streaked face. "I cannot drop the charges, Mom," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You forged federal documents. You attempted to steal from a government-monitored honeypot trust. The IRS does not offer settlements for identity theft and perjury." "Cassidy, please," she wailed, grabbing the edge of the wooden partition separating us. "You cannot do this to me." I leaned in slightly, locking eyes with her. "Remember what you told me when I was 17? The night Thomas found out I applied to an out-of-state university and threw my belongings into the driveway. I was crying on the porch with my packed bags, begging you to help me." Barbara froze her breath, hitching in her throat as the memory hit her. "You stood in the doorway," I reminded her, enunciating every single word with absolute clarity. "You looked down at me and said, 'Failures don't belong in this family.' You locked the deadbolt and turned off the porch light." I straightened my posture, looking at the federal agent standing behind her. "Have a nice trip to federal prison, Mom." The agent pulled Barbara to her feet, snapping the handcuffs onto her wrists. She sobbed uncontrollably as they marched her down the aisle, following my father and Terrence out of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind them. Within minutes, the courtroom cleared. The opposing attorneys packed their briefcases in silence, sprinting out without making eye contact. Judge Harrison nodded firmly to Evelyn and me before retreating to his chambers. I stood alone near the defense table with my lawyer. My phone buzzed. My security clearance had been fully reinstated alongside a promotion. 3 months later, the spectacular downfall of the Wilson family dominated the local and national financial news networks. I watched the final sentencing broadcast from the quiet comfort of my new home office, sipping dark roast coffee as the anchor broke down the federal judge's blistering ruling. Thomas Wilson and Terrence Miller stood side by side in matching orange jumpsuits, their custom-tailored suits replaced by standard federal issue. They were both handed 10-year sentences in federal prison, without the possibility of early parole. The prosecution had successfully proven their extensive wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy network. Thomas looked broken, his former tyrannical posture replaced by a hollow, sunken shell of a man who finally realized his wealth could not buy his way out of a federal indictment. Barbara Wilson did not fare much better. The judge had no sympathy for her performative tears or her claims of ignorance. Ignorance was not a defense when your signature authorized fraudulent medical claims and illegal trust transfers. She received a 5-year sentence for her active role in the conspiracy. The news footage showed her being led out of the courthouse, hiding her makeup-free face behind a manila folder completely stripped of the country club status she had prized above her own daughter. Penelope managed to avoid federal prison, but she did not escape the catastrophic fallout. With her husband's assets seized by the federal government and my father's empire liquidated to pay massive IRS penalties, her lavish lifestyle instantly evaporated. She was completely penniless. The banks foreclosed on her sprawling suburban mansion, repossessed her luxury vehicles, and froze every account she had access to. The last I heard from mutual acquaintances, Penelope was living in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, working a minimum-wage retail job folding clothes at a discount outlet mall just to afford her weekly rent. Her manufactured neck injury had miraculously healed the second she realized she had to stand on her own 2 feet. I turned off the television and stepped out onto the expansive wooden deck of my newly purchased beachfront property in Malibu. The gentle roar of the Pacific Ocean filled the air, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension of my childhood home. I had not touched the principal amount of my grandfather's trust fund. I did not need to. The accumulated interest alone had been more than enough to secure this modern glass-walled sanctuary. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and freedom, blowing away the last lingering shadows of my past. Inside the house, the atmosphere was warm and vibrant. I was hosting a celebratory dinner, but the guest list looked entirely different from the toxic, performative gatherings my mother used to orchestrate. There were no blood relatives present. There was no forced small talk, no passive-aggressive insults, and no walking on eggshells to appease a tyrant. Instead, the room was filled with people who had proven their loyalty through actions, not just empty genetic ties. Evelyn stood by the kitchen island laughing warmly as she poured a crisp Chardonnay. My brilliant lawyer had become a genuine friend throughout the ordeal, proving that fierce advocacy and compassion could absolutely coexist. Several of my colleagues from the Treasury Department occupied the living room, sharing stories from our latest successful fraud investigations. My director, who had personally pushed through my promotion and clearance reinstatement the moment the dust settled, was raising a toast to my recent promotion to lead task force director. These were the people who had watched my back, respected my intellect, and supported my growth. This was my true family. I walked back into the living room carrying a tray of roasted bruschetta, feeling a profound sense of belonging. We spent the evening eating, laughing, and enjoying the simple, profound peace of genuine connection. Nobody demanded anything from me. Nobody expected me to shrink myself to make them feel larger. I was completely accepted exactly as I was. As the evening wound down and my guests moved out to the deck to watch the stars emerge over the dark ocean, I lingered by the open glass doors. I poured myself a final glass of deep red wine and stepped out to join them, pausing at the edge of the deck to look out at the magnificent sunset. The sky was painted in brilliant strokes of violet and gold, reflecting perfectly off the rolling waves. I thought about the path that had led me to this beautiful, quiet moment. I thought about the sheer terror I had felt as a teenager, convinced I would never escape my father's heavy shadow. I thought about the exhausting years spent hiding my true capabilities, playing the role of the quiet, unremarkable clerk, just to avoid their predatory gaze. And I thought about the glorious, undeniable satisfaction of watching their own arrogance build the very trap that ultimately consumed them. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, letting the cool ocean breeze wash over my face. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt no regret. They tried to cage me at 17 because they were terrified of what I could become, I said softly, my voice carrying clearly over the rhythmic sound of the crashing waves. They tried to break me at 32 because they realized they had failed. Blood doesn't make a family, respect does. And as for my trust fund, let's just say the best investment I ever made was learning how to let my enemies destroy themselves. I raised my glass toward the fading light, silently saluting the brilliant, ruthless foresight of a grandfather who knew exactly what his son was capable of, and the relentless, unyielding woman I had been forced to become in order to finally survive and ultimately thrive. The past was permanently locked away in a federal holding cell, and my future was as wide open and undeniably powerful as the ocean stretching out before me, in all its vast, endless, beautiful glory.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss,